continues to do it, and every day he does it live, which is pretty remarkable. So we're very pleased to have this body of work here. And I'd like to introduce Eric Levin, who's the deputy editor of the New Jersey Monthly, who's going to talk about Peter's work, and I'll just hand it over to you.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, one thing, thank you all for coming, and I know it's not incidental for you, a lot of the trips are longer. As well as thank you to the Hunterdon for all the people who helped put this together and gave me the opportunity to show you. I want to also say Eric has written and he's been following my work since the first year, and he wrote the original piece, I think, in Mountain Times in that original year. So he's really got a good perspective on, what I've been doing, and I believe has really found a way to understand it and to talk about it and write about it.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's really been a great thing for me to follow the progress of the journal over the years. And the thing that astounded me, even at the first moment that I got involved with talking with you about it, and that was when the project was 6 months old, and your goal at that time was 365 collages in 365 days. And at that moment, it felt like Mount Olympus, Oh my God, can you really do it, And so now from the perspective of 3,600 and the 2 leap year ones,
Right.
I mean, it's just an amazing production. And I think what astounds me every single day, because I look forward to it in my emails, and I'm sure most of you do, is the freshness of each and every collage. And I think that's the number one question for me, is I'm fascinated with how you are able to take a fresh approach every day and essentially surprise yourself.
I think one of the elements that you were stating about the 365 goal is that I don't necessarily think, I don't think I was thinking in terms of an end time. I think the way I work is that I think about it as a improvisational, intuitive day that I take fresh each day, and that I don't think about where I'm going to end up that day, let alone that year, or the 10 years even. I mean, I find myself here now, I think it's kind of crazy that this year, 10 years have gone by so quickly. But the freshness is really important to me, and I think that, again, which you kind of pointed in the writing as what in the title of the writing, is that I feel like with limitations, I have a freedom. And the freedom is that I know that I have this amount of time that I'm going to do it in the morning, first thing in the morning. I know I'm going to use these materials from just one paper. And then I realized that from that point on, I can do anything I want. And the longer you do something, the more you go through all the possibilities, and you realize, there's always another possibility. And that's where I kind of end up each day. I find myself with a new possibility.
You described it to me when I interviewed you for the essay as creating a puzzle and finding a solution to the puzzle at the same time, which really seems like an interesting way of getting yourself into trouble again and finding a way out of it in a fresh way each day.
And there will be times that the puzzle there's an underlayer physical puzzle that I'm creating by cutting out the papers, and then I'll look at them and I'll just deconstruct them completely because it's something that doesn't really work where I wanted it to go or where I think it should go. So by doing that deconstruction, I've entered a new phase of the piece, and it's giving me that freedom again to explore a new way of visualizing and creating.
How do you know when a piece is done?
Well, I'll have a job that I need to get to by 10. So if I start at 7, I know I have to get done by 9, and then I scan it in, I put it onto my blog and to Facebook, and then I take a shower, and I'm ready for a job at 10.
I think it's a second cup of coffee, once you finish that.
Usually it's the 2-cup club. Right. but it isn't something that I just know. It's one of those things where I could keep adding to it. And Elizabeth, my wife, always tells me, well, you don't want to put too much into it because then it gets too complicated or, it's confusing. And there's a danger that I like that kind of layering and where it challenges the viewer to create more in that perception. It gives you more of an opportunity.
But somehow you avoid what could be the trap of feeling you have to top yourself, because it would be impossible to do so, especially for 10 years every single day. So how do you keep it fresh and not have the weight of what you've done fence you in, as it were?
I almost see there's the idea of transforming the paper is a big enough idea for me to begin with. To take the pages and to extract pieces and then to redefine them in some other place. I think each day is a self-portrait, and as the self-portrait goes, each day I feel differently. What I bring to it, what the paper brings to me, and what I end up with.
That is a great quote, and I'm telling you, as a journalist, I have ears that are this big for great quotes. Bing! And what you just said, if you had said that when we talked for the essay, I would have put that in the essay. Because that is just think about that, folks. It's a self-portrait. That's really a deep statement, actually, and it actually makes sense when you look at the title that you gave this work. Way back in the beginning, almost from the word go, you called it the Collage Journal. So what is a journal of the day, the view of the day? And you saying that it's a self-portrait is that what you pick and the way you put it together expresses or clarifies how this day feels to you.
It's also the most opportune time because I'm just waking up. I have no baggage of the day to work with or to deal with. And, in some ways I'm still dreaming. And so I find myself in these pieces, they're refining myself from not being anywhere before that. I'm kind of creating with a vacuum of nothing to really affect it. It's pure in that way. And in doing that, I also find that I kind of, find some sort of direction through that process. By just starting to move things around in papers and extracting them from the newspaper, I find that it grounds me for the day. It gives me a sense of, I could work through the day now. I've meditated, in a sense, visual meditation.
It's a visual meditation. That's another great phrase. It's a really revealing, really interesting take on it. And another thing is about the New York Times. I think most of us, in this part of the world, read the New York Times every day. And we know that it has evolved a lot visually over the years. Somebody was saying before, remember when it was called the Gray Lady? It's not gray anymore, right? And there's a lot of color in there. However, I think what's also surprising about this body of work is the beauty that you find in these pages, because most of us have turned the same pages you've turned, and when I look at these collages, I go, did that come out of that? Remember Roseanne Downey? You're probably all too young, but she was like,
I remember.
Yes, Saturday Night Live, right? She did the weekend update, and she would talk about like having a cold and snot coming out. She said, did that come out of me? And I'm like, these beautiful things. This came out of the New York Times. It's like the New York Times is very sophisticated visually, but it's not a repository of the beauty that you find it.
And that's exactly why part of these limitations, it's transforming the ordinary. It's transforming something that could look bland to most people. They're just reading the news and they still see black and white. They don't see the color. Most people are well, I didn't realize, what do you add watercolor to that? I mean, there's all this sense of, and it's the way you extract, it's the way you place, and it's the way you transform the ordinary.
Right. So, do you folks have questions for Peter that you're just dying to ask?
I'd like to know,
Yeah.
do you keep the scraps that you don't
It's
use?
so funny. You think alike. No, they go into recycling. And there's sometimes I'll have another working piece, two at once, and I just can't get rid of it.
Oh, I was thinking, do you get more opportunities in the Sunday paper?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I relish them. Mondays and Saturdays are slim pickings. They're really thin and they're getting thinner. And I think they're more black and white. They're not as much color in those in recent years too. But Sunday is, it's a feast.
Right.
That's why when I did other shows in the past, I would do 2 collages on Sunday because there was plenty of material to work with from that one paper.
Right.
Here's a technical question about the Times. You're a subscriber. That means you get that big fat Sunday paper on Saturday. Do you restrict yourself though to the Saturday paper on Saturday?
I do.
Uh-huh.
I have very strict
The
rules.
purity.
I have
The
very strict
integrity of
rules,
the concept.
We'll just
It's
take his
called
word for it.
obsessive compulsive.
Right.
So you have
So, first of all, I just want to say I've followed this project for a long time. I think it's one of the most fabulous art projects I've seen in a long time. It's just a wonderful piece of work. So my question is this. Here and there are photographic images that we can recognize that any of us could have cut out of the time if we had the manual dexterity and the inspiration. But there are also shapes that appear to be cut out of color blocks that you're carving, right? So and there are a lot where it's hard to tell actually which is which, because especially the ones where they're multiples of images.
Sure.
And the ones that I think you cut out, because I can't always tell. Clearly, some of them are free-form shapes, like the Matisse cutout technique. But there are others, like the dancers on the butterfly. Are those individually hand carved like that? Or?
Yeah, I would layer papers, like 4 or 5 pages or whatever, but also scoping out what each one would look like after, and then I would cut out those to duplicate them.
But you're creating the form.
It's half and half. Sometimes I find a form. It could be a dance in the art section, a dancer that I think the gesture is really powerful, and I might change the gesture when I cut it, but I'll use it as a point of departure.
Yeah, because my point is the art isn't just finding the images and composing them.
No,
There's
it's
a great
creating,
deal.
from the paper a new image. Yeah.
One of the things that has always entertained me about the series is the differences in perspective that you create, and that some of your collages will be very flat, taking place entirely on the surface of the paper and sort of fireworks and geometrical. And then on the other hand, you create many different kinds of 3-dimensional illusions, and those are wondrous, those are like magical realms that you create.
That is something more so in recent years I'd like to explore. It's I call them kind of theatrical stages that, I incorporate many times. I can build the stage and then bring a figure into it that has some sort of emotional content beyond or working within that context. And, I like creating environments. There's something about that, again, creating depth in an environment that gives that some life as well.
And also you're a photographer, and one thing I find, being a photographer also myself, is that when I see a photograph that I love, it's inevitably one in which I feel I can dive into it and roam around inside of it and explore all the pieces of it. And your 3-dimensional collages have that quality that invites you in and lets you roam around inside and discover different things.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, there's a lot of surreal qualities that can occur in there. And a lot of what I do, I try not to be didactic in the work. I try to create things that people bring their own stories to, because I'll have 10 people look at one piece and they'll all take something else from that.
That raises an interesting point about the evolution of the series. If you go and look back at the early years, and we talked about this for the essay, there are more recognizable faces, very familiar faces that were in the news at that time, and you kind of evolved away from that. And tell us a little bit about that process.
At that point, there was a lot more of social commentary that I did have very distinct icons, places, and also, I had problems with our, politics, our environment, and just what was going on with wars and such. And so through time, I felt that I really liked to pursue more of the poetry and the mystery of art, and to give not so much information that people respond intellectually first, but they respond more from their heart.
And that mystery, that's another great word that you find in all of these. There's a mystery of, you know, a type of beauty that you find that's often very lush. And when you then stop to think that this comes out of a newspaper reporting on mostly things that one would abhor or regret or whatever, there's a kind of a push-pull there, you know?
You know, and that's a visual device that could be like called radical juxtaposition, where you create, you know, something that's uncomfortable in a beautiful environment. And, you know, I like playing with those ideas as well.
Any other questions? Yes, right here.
Are there like environmental factors that change like the collage or the look of it or the colors or
You're like saying like heat and light and water and things
any of
like
that?
No, the collages are actually, well, those are 10 years old and they've done pretty well. But what I do is, it is the newspaper. I use an archival glue.
No. I'm talking about when you're making it. Like where you're making it, whether you're making it at the kitchen table. I know you made it in other places.
No, I mean, there's different grades of newspaper if I'm using something outside of the New York Times, but otherwise, you know, I've done them 20,000 feet up in the air in an airplane.
You know, one thing that Peter told me, I don't think made its way into the essay, was that the pages of the New York Times Magazine are hell on the Exacto.
Clay-coated, yes.
Why it has a clay coating?
Yeah, so it's subtle. I mean, they're very thin pages, but the
Yeah.
way they make them so, you know, versatile is that they clay coat them. So you use sharp Exactos. After a couple of cuts, that wears the Exacto down. It's amazing.
Sue the bastards!
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any more
You had a
questions?
question, didn't you, in the pink?
Yeah.
Oh.
I wondered if this replaced another ritual that you have had in the past in the morning.
Well, you know, this is a good habit.
But did you have something at any other time in your life that you did every morning?
not that. Not as an art, you know, related ritual. I mean, I don't think there's anything that replaces it. It's
But
actually.
how about like running?
Nope.
I don't like
Nope.
that. I like hiking.
But you know, that sort of raises another question, which is, why did this project start on the very day that it did start? Not a day before, not a day later. What was it about that morning that changed everything?
Oh, my wife Elizabeth we sat down for breakfast and she said, why don't we do some sort of ritual that is an art-related one that we do every day? And you had said that you were going to do a sculpture every day, and I'm looking down at the paper and, you know, feeling some discomfort about just having a visual dialogue with the paper. And my natural medium, I've been making collages for 30 years, was to cut up the paper. And so from that day on, I basically, you know, did that and stopped.
And you had been thinking about doing something on a more intimate scale, because you had done a couple of years earlier a set of large-scale collages for the new wing of the Montclair Art Museum, right? Those were big.
Those
big
were large.
pieces.
That was a 2.5-year project.
Yeah.
I did these large-scale portraits of artists and musicians. And, yeah, and I felt I wanted an intimacy as well. And you know, the journaling, that kind of concept. I never thought about writing a journal. You know, I never thought about that. But visually, a journal seemed compelling to me. And you know, the size, the intimacy. It's just a very natural process for me. As well as, you know, I could do it at the kitchen table, which is really kind of nice in the real environment.
And a kind of amusing aspect of this is that you've somehow kept it going despite traveling, despite blizzards when the paper maybe did not arrive. I mean, you have found a way. Well, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
How
I
do you do
mean,
it?
there's, you know, well, I get the paper delivered, so that 90% of the time,
Right, but
it's there.
the other times-
The other times, if I'm traveling, obviously I'll find a local paper. If we're in Paris, we'll get a local paper. If we're in Woodstock, they'll get a local paper. I like using other media. I mean, I think it's kind of cool to take another media and challenge myself with that. But the Times is still unrivaled by any of the others. The instances where I think over the last 10 years there's been maybe 4 blizzards where there's been no paper deliveries and I've been home. And in those cases, I always have a stock of newsprint paper, and I'll go online to the Times website and I'll look at images and I'll start just printing images from the Times directly, and then I'll put those up. So not to break the cycle.
To change the images so it's almost
Well, the idea is to
unrecognizable.
transform them. I mean, that's my priority to begin with, that you don't recognize this as the New York Times,
Right.
from the New York Times.
I think you have copyright.
The earlier pieces had more physical, full imagery in it, which, but even those, I wasn't really concerned about.
Peter, isn't there something with a certain
There's
percentage?
a percentage, there's a couple of things, and if you also are taking it to you're changing the nature of the content enough, then, there's specific reasons that you can certainly use. But if you take something in its entirety, obviously, that's a whole different story.
The other question, or what fascinates me, is the way you have used the gray to accent the colors. I mean, because you have vibrant colors against the neutral, that color is even more vibrant than it would be if it was with chroma frames.
That's true, yeah, and that's, again, utilizing, it's kind of like cooking in a way that, it's proportions and ingredients, and if you combine those ingredients in a way, you'll see more of that yellow that didn't necessarily on its own doesn't exist unless those things are surrounding it,
Right.
And it's true that the final taste becomes that whole,
He's also a really good cook.
That's a great, that's a
He
great
is.
analogy with cooking. Because cooking is always a matter of balance of acid and other sorts of flavors and textures and so forth. Like, I'm the type of cook that basically just says what's in the fridge and what can I do with it. It's sort of like,
yeah.
But you have created this cooking that, what I think we see in each one of these pieces, one word for it is balance, but another word for it is a certain kind of peace or resolution or stillness. They're not, there's a lot of dynamism in each one, and yet as a whole, there is a resolution, a stillness that you achieve. And having both of those going on at once, in that balance, I think is one of the great accomplishments of your 10 years of the first decade.
Yeah, the first decade. I had a teacher years ago. I stayed with Len Stokes, who was a disciple of Joseph Albers, who was a color theorist, and he used to always say, when looking at collages, and I studied collage with him, that there's a taste in your mouth you get. If they're really working, there's a taste in your mouth you get.
That's great.
Good quote.
Another good quote. That's right. Well, I think you have left us all with a wonderful taste, many different tastes that all work together, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I am.